Welcome. My name is Missy Barnett. I'm here with my friend Joel, and we're excited to welcome you as co-chairs of this evening's event. Joel and I are part of the current Weinstein Fellowship Program with the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, a program focused on leadership development for young adults throughout our community. Through this fellowship, we recently took a 10-day trip to Israel with 17 other dedicated young leaders. Prior to our trip, for me, Israel really felt like an abstract place, as this was my first trip to Israel. As a visual and experiential learner, it was hard for me to fully grasp Israel and all of its complexities. I've heard many stories about Israel from biblical times to present and have met many Israelis, but physically visiting so many places and meeting so many people has broadened my journey to understanding Israel. Security in Israel is a challenging topic and one that we spent time discussing throughout our trip. I really appreciated being able to tour the West Bank with Danny Tirza, a security expert and architect of the security barrier. During our time with Danny, he referred to the barrier as a security fence instead of a wall, and his use of that terminology helped me better understand the need for this security measure. Using specific language like this can really change the way you see and understand things. That same day, we had the opportunity to join a family for tea and homemade raisins in a Palestinian settlement. Spending time in the settlement, meeting the people, seeing their homes, and hearing their stories was very emotional and impactful for me. Here, too, experiencing someone else's culture helped my understanding to grow. We also visited the Path to Peace Wall, which was started by artist Sameret Samir, who lives in Moshav, right along the Gaza Strip. The Path to Peace Wall is a joint mosaic creation. Sameret Samir made small pieces of pottery, which she began applying to the wall to brighten up the gray wall and add some color. Her intent is to change the atmosphere of that space, something that they look at each day. Listening to her describe having to work to keep her children and family safe while maintaining a normal life amidst rockets being fired into her community was deeply moving. I love that she found something positive and productive to create, and that through her art, she makes it possible for everyone who visits to make a positive impact in that space too. It was truly a gift to be able to spend time in these places and spaces, meet the communities, and hear their stories. While I still have so much to learn, I am grateful for these opportunities and experiences. I'd like to thank my husband, David, who took care of all 4 of our kids while I was gone, the Weinstein family, the Federation, and in particular 2 MJF staff members, Kelly and Uriah, for making this trip possible for me.
Thank you, Missy. Our trip was truly an enlightening and once-in-a-lifetime experience. We were exposed to parts of Israel you would never see on your standard tourist or birthright trip. I had been to Israel once before, but it had been a number of years since our last trip. We spent 10 days immersing ourselves in the culture, food, and meeting some of the most amazing people trying to advocate for social and political change within Israel. As many of you know, one of the major issues surrounding Israel and Israeli politics is the state's relationship with its neighbors. Our trip fell during both the US midterm elections and Israel's most recent election, so we experienced 2 elections in 1 week. Fortunately, the Israeli call centers didn't have my cell phone number. Throughout our time, we encountered various perspectives on Israel and saw how the Israeli elections highlighted a divide in their opinions. One of the things that stood out on our trip was a day spent focusing on grassroots efforts for peace with Israel and Palestinian neighbors in and around the West Bank. We visited an organization called Roots, which brings together Israelis and Palestinians to work together on finding common ground. Hearing from both an Israeli and Palestinian while there, one of the key takeaways was that everyone has their truth. And it is this truth that formulates an individual's understanding of the world and the people around it. It is through that lens that we must understand that without recognizing and listening to someone else's truth, we will never be able to find and reach a common ground in which lasting peace can be built upon. We also spent time with organizations where we got to see the direct impact that the Milwaukee Jewish Federation has within Israel. Through visits to places such as the absorption centers in Rekevet and Kiryat Gat, we saw firsthand how the Jewish Federation supports the lives of refugees and those in need. Like Missy, I am grateful to have spent 10 days in Israel with the Weinstein cohort, who, as a part of our program, aim to become leaders and future influencers in the Jewish community. This trip and our time spent with the program are just the beginning of our journey, and I'm truly thankful to the Federation and the Weinstein family for being able to provide us with such an opportunity. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give a hearty thank you to Kim Fish, Chief Development Officer at United Hatzalah. Kim helped arrange this evening's event with Ambassador Oren, and we couldn't be more grateful.
Yes, thank you, Kim and United Hatzalah. We'd also like to thank the Harry and Rose Sampson Family Jewish Community Center for their partnership in this event. Now we invite Kim to join the podium to share a few words.
It was Thursday, March 24th at 5:41 p.m. when I sent Miriam an email. United Hatzalah of Israel had been working on the Moldova-Ukraine border since the war broke out, and during an emergency, there was going to be a rescue inside Ukraine, and I knew that Miriam and the Milwaukee Jewish community would be able to help. We had been asked to airlift 6 critically ill refugees from Romania to get them to Israel and to a hospital to help save their lives. The one challenge, we needed to guarantee $165,000 in 24 hours. My ask was simple. If you think of anyone who might be interested in being part of this airlift and part of this life-saving work, please just let me know. 1 hour later, at 6:41, I received a text back saying, "Count us in. Joan and I have a foundation that would love to support this. However, we're just starting our anti-Semitism audit tonight. So we're busy, but we don't want you to have to wait. We'll wire the money, but get those people out." And then on March 28th, the head of our Ukraine operations and I got to present our work to your Israel and Overseas Committee, where we were able to speak about the impact United Hatzalah was having on the region. The reason United Hatzalah is able to respond the way we do in Ukraine is because every day we are the volunteer rapid response team in Israel. We have 6,200 volunteers throughout Israel, Jews, Arabs, Christians, men and women, gay and straight, all working together with one mission: to save lives. Our goal is to get there within 3 minutes or less, free of charge. We had the relationship in Ukraine because we had trained their Hatzalah volunteers when they were building a model that looked like ours. Because of that, as of today, we have been able to provide 32,000 refugees with medical care, psychological support, and humanitarian aid at the Moldova-Ukraine borders and in Kishinev, Moldova. We've brought 145 tons of food, medicine, and humanitarian aid to refugees, as well as hospitals and Jewish communities in Ukraine. We've cooked and served 50,000 kosher meals, and we've chartered 35 humanitarian rescue, medical, and cargo flights as part of our Operation Wings airlift. We've carried out numerous special missions evacuating the injured, babies, Holocaust survivors, and other vulnerable people. And your federation provided an $18,000 allocation. All of this is helping to ensure that people are getting what they need. And on top of this, another $150,000 of emergency grant money through the Jewish Federations of North America was granted to United Hatzalah, thanks to great ambassadors like yourselves in communities throughout North America. On your Israel and Overseas Committee call, I was particularly moved by Tanya Arbit, who's in this room today. She shared her personal story from recipient of Federation dollars to donor to then returning back to the Poland-Ukraine border to being able to help mothers and children who are fleeing. She witnessed firsthand the power of the work each one of you is making possible and the power of your collective system. Tanya, Milwaukee is lucky to have your voice and your leadership. Before I call up two very special people, I do also want to thank the Harry and Rose Sampson JCC for hosting and partnering with your federation and United Hatzalah tonight, and for being such an incredible environment for your community. So now I want to call up two people who I consider not only very dear friends, but honorary United Hatzalah volunteers, as they always respond in 3 minutes or less, and I want to present them something that is a gift for your entire community. Joan Lubara, Miriam Rosenzweig. It's a shock, it's you too. So Joan, I had the privilege of introducing Joan when she became your board chair. Unfortunately, ended up over Zoom, but it still stands true today. She is one of the most philanthropic women that I have the privilege of calling one of my dearest friends. You are a mentor, a life coach, and you are just someone who understands the power of bringing people together and what it does in terms of building community. And Miriam, there is no better partnership than the two of you. You exemplify what it means to create a lay-pro partnership, and you are the example to people all over North America in terms of what a chair and a CEO can do and build together. And I am just so proud to look at you and what you have done and created in this community. And I can't wait to see what's next, because you are just incredible. I'm so proud of you. So I want to present you all with this photo album of all of the things that you have made possible. And this is not just two of them, but your entire community, simply by saying Hanani. So on behalf of United Hatzalah, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just leaving my notes here. Are you done?
I'm done.
Do you want to take a picture?
Yeah, let's take a picture.
Okay.
Let's go over there and take a picture. Here, Miriam. That one's mine. Oh, no, this one's
This
mine.
one's yours.
Okay. Wow, Kim, thank you so much. This is loud. Do I sound really loud? Really, thank you. Thank you for all your wonderful work that you're doing at United Hatzalah in Israel and Ukraine and around the world, really. Thank you. And Miriam, it's always a pleasure to be working with you. It is my honor, and I'm so happy to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Oren Michael was born and raised in New Jersey and then educated at Princeton and Columbia. He's been a visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown. He was a member of the Knesset for 5 years and deputy minister to the prime minister from 2015 to 2020. He's a 2-time gold medal winner in rowing in the Maccabiah Games, and he's still rowing. He's looking good. He's in very good shape. He was an officer in the IDF, a lone soldier, a paratrooper in the First and Second Lebanon War. As was mentioned earlier, and as many of you know him, he was Israel's ambassador to the U.S. from 2009 to 2013. He was also a Middle East analyst for CBS and CNN, and he was named by the Forward and the Jerusalem Post as one of the top 5 most influential Jews in America and the world, and he loves that distinction, as all influential Jews do. He's also the author of several books. Oh, I should have brought my copy up. I brought my copy tonight for him to sign one of them, including his most recently released work of fiction, Swan's Way, which, as I just mentioned, I am currently reading. It is set during World War II. Excuse me, it's a work of fiction, and he has 3 books that were New York Times bestsellers that are nonfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, Please join me in welcoming a man for all seasons, Michael Oren.
Up. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Did I
Right.
get most of it?
You got all of it. You got all of it. I don't think I need this, right? I'm free. Free at last. Thank you. Erev Tov, Shalom. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, John. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Mark Shapiro. Everywhere, the incomparable and indomitable Kim Fish. Thank you. And thank you to Hatzalah for everything you do. Hatzalah is an extraordinary, extraordinary organization. I've been saved by Hatzalah. They're amazing. We'll hear more about them later. So I have been asked to talk about a great number of things tonight, none of which have almost any relation to the other. So I want to talk about the Israeli elections, the situation in the Ukraine, get this, and anti-Semitism, which is the equivalent of talking about apples, oranges, and kreplach, okay? So I'm going to start off with something that is non-controversial and very simple. I want to talk about Jewish identity. Jewish identity. Who are we? What is a Jew? Who is a Jew? And, okay, what are we? Are we a religion? Are we a nationality? Are we a culture? Are we a sense of humor? Are we culinary traits? What exactly are we? I mean, the closest example I can think of in the world is the Japanese. So Japan is basically an island. In Israel, we're kind of an island. Japanese have a language. They have a national religion, Shinto Buddhism. So, okay, we're like the Japanese. There's one huge difference between us and the Japanese, okay? If you are, say, an Italian Catholic kid in Long Island and you wake up one morning and you decide to be Jewish, you can go through a certain process and you can become Jewish, and you acquire Jewish history, you acquire historical memory, all the traditions. You can be the same Italian Catholic kid in Long Island, and you cannot wake up in the morning and decide you want to be Japanese. This doesn't happen. So we are completely sui generis in our identity. There's really nothing like us in the world. And since we are all part of this family, I want to begin my talk tonight by talking about my recent family vacation, which you'll appreciate, right? We went on a vacation to Sicily. Anybody's been to Sicily? It's amazing. Sicily's great. The food's great, the people are great. But what I love it as an historian is all the history of Sicily. Okay, it's got Greek ruins, it's got Roman ruins, it's got Norman ruins, it's got Arab ruins, the most magnificent ruins in the world. The most impressive thing that we saw in Sicily was not above ground, it was 30 feet below the surface of the city of Syracuse. You go down on these steps that are hewn out of solid rock, and you go down, 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 and you reach 3 pools, which are still running with water. And these are the oldest mikveh baths in Europe, carved by Jews 2,000 years ago. And the water's still running, and the water's still running. Now, I begin by talking about the families and our history, because I'm going to be talking about a lot of divisive issues tonight that could very well divide the Jewish people and do divide the Jewish people on many different levels. Probably the most obvious, the one you're reading about continually in the papers now, is the recent Israeli elections. And to begin to talk about the Israeli elections and not to spend 4 or 5 hours on it, I will summarize it all with 2 words. What are the 2 words? Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay? Israeli politics for the last 20, 25 years have been about those 2 words, in one way or another, Benjamin Netanyahu. And why? I mean, I've worked with this gentleman for many, many years. I've taught at a couple of good universities in this country. I have almost never met anybody of his intellectual capacity. He is a former commander in our Delta Force, not just a member of Delta Force, but a commander in the Delta Force, a graduate of MIT. He's an accomplished economist, statesman. He was the former ambassador to the UN, the former assistant ambassador to the United States, has held every single position in Israeli governance. And he is not only the longest-serving Israeli prime minister, he is the longest-serving democratically elected leader in the world. And he's physically very robust. He will exhaust you. He gets like 2 hours a night sleep, this guy. Why? But what is it about Benjamin Netanyahu that makes him the center of Israeli politics for these 20, 25 years? And to understand that, all you have to do is go on YouTube. Guarantee you. Look up Babysitter on YouTube. It's a 30-second clip. It is an advertisement that appeared in the 2015 Knesset elections. I ran in those elections. And in this little YouTube clip, you see a pair of, say, nerdy parents who are clearly getting ready to go out because there's kids talking in the background. The doorbell rings, and the father opens the door, and who's standing there but Bibi? And the father says, well, we don't want you. We didn't ask for you. And Bibi says, okay, I'll bring Tzipi, meaning Tzipi Livni. No, we don't want Tzipi Livni. It's okay, I'll bring your ear. No, we don't want your ear. Okay, come in. So Bibi goes in. Next scene, Bibi's sitting on a couch. He's watching TV, eating popcorn, a little blanket over his legs. The parents come in, and they say, is everything okay? And Netanyahu says, yes, your children are sleeping safely. That's it. The babysitter, it's called, the babysitter. And that's all you have to know. It's about security. Every poll we have taken now for 20, 25 years, show that the issue that Israelis care most about, most consistently, is security, and whether our children are safe. And to this date, there is no single Israeli politician who can lay claim to having best assured our children's safety at night when they go to sleep. It's about Netanyahu. Even the people who hate him agree that he is best qualified to assure our safety. I live in southern Tel Aviv. In my neighborhood, you can't say a word against Bibi. You go 300 yards to the north, you can't say a word for Bibi. And yet, by every poll, by at least a double-digit margin, he is always listed as the person who's most capable of assuring that our kids sleep safely. And yet now, for five elections, we have been deadlocked. We've been deadlocked principally over the issue of Bibi, because you have right-wing parties that won't join in a coalition with him. They prefer to join in a coalition with left-wing parties rather than be with him, because he's so divisive. And this election was no different. In fact, this election was a runoff. It was a total tie. And what broke it was the fact that there were two little parties that didn't get into Knesset. And according to our rather arcane system, if you vote for a party that doesn't get into Knesset, and they have to get 3.2% of the electorate to get into Knesset, your votes are not cast into the garbage. They are divided up among the other parties according to which party is the largest, gets the largest share of the non-discarded votes. You follow that? There's going to be a quiz later. Okay? So most of those votes, there was a party, an Arab party, and a left-wing Jewish party, those votes mostly went to Likud. And it gave Netanyahu and the Likud a solid majority of 64 seats out of 120. In the Knesset, you need at least 61, and 61 is not very stable. Not very stable. I was part of a 61-part coalition, and it was impossible. You couldn't go to the bathroom. We inherited something terrible from you. Thank you. We inherited a thing called the filibuster, which, if you want to impress people, how do you say filibuster in Hebrew? Filibuster. And if there's a filibuster at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're in the bathroom, they will come and drag you out to come and vote, lest the government fall. So 64 is a very solid majority. But within that 64, as you know, there are elements who are not right-wing, but extreme right-wing. And not just extreme right-wing, but racist. And frankly, I don't think that they would object to being called racist. They would say to themselves, okay, yeah, we're racist against Arabs, we're racist because the people who want to destroy us. And this poses tremendous challenges, both internally within Israel, and there are all sorts of, there is a member of this coalition who is homophobic, and now a number of local municipal governments have saying that they will not accept directions from this minister on issues relating to gay rights in the state of Israel, and I think that's frankly wonderful. I'm not an ambassador anymore. I can say this. I'm not representing this government. But it'll also impact our foreign relations and our relations with the American Jewish community. Among the positions that are to be adopted by that have been championed by some of these new members of the government have been to no longer recognize reform conversions to Judaism in this country as a basis for making Aliyah to Israel. If you convert to Judaism in this country with a Reform synagogue, you can make Aliyah as a Jew. But they want to reverse that. That's according to a decision by Israel's Supreme Court. They want to reverse that. They want to reverse the definition of who's a Jew, which is what I started out with, of who's a Jew, starting with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Israel changed the definition of who's a Jew, who can be let into the state of Israel under the law of return. Under the law of return, if you're Jewish, you can get on an airplane, land in the state of Israel, and you're going to get a passport. Okay, it's our version of of affirmative action for the absence of Jewish statehood for 2,000 years. We're righting a historical wrong for which we paid a very, very high price. In 1989, recognizing that Soviet communism, and Natasha, where are you? You'll understand this. Tanya, sorry, that that they recognized that Soviet communism played havoc on the Jewish family. And it wasn't fair to hold Soviet Jews according to the same criteria of having a Jewish mother and having that type of halachic Jewish definition of who's a Jew, so they changed the definition. Anybody who had a Jewish grandparent could come in. It's known as the grandparent clause. This current government wants to change that again. Change that again at a time when thousands of Ukrainian and Russian Jews want to make Aliyah because of the situation. So that is also very, very controversial. And issues relating to Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, Jerusalem, all of that would potentially cause rifts with the Biden administration, with the American Jewish community. Controversial. What can you say that would mitigate or in any ways ameliorate these fears? And it's this. One, first of all, let's take a moment and salute Israeli democracy. Israel is one of the maybe 5 countries on the entire planet that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. Think about it. It's the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. That's about it, guys. There aren't many. Israel has never known a second of non-democratic governance, and Israel is the only country on that list that has never known a second of peace. And historically, what destroys democracies all the time is war and conflict. It hasn't. We've never had any of a threat of a military coup, though we have an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. That's not supposed to happen. So let's really give credit to Israeli democracy. 2, politicians, and I know this personally, politicians say all sorts of things before they get into office. Then one morning they wake up to the horrific realization that they are actually in charge of the country. And things change. Some of us here, not many, will be old enough to remember Menachem Begin's election in 1977. Some of us will remember, probably more of us will remember Ariel Sharon's election in 2001. These were people who were considered extreme radicals, warmongers, and they became greatest champions of peace. Menachem Begin ended up getting a Nobel Prize for peace. Ariel Sharon gave a speech to the General Assembly, the last one I know, in Hebrew, and got an ovation because he's a peacemaker. So let's see what happens with these individuals once they actually get into government. To get a little more granular, as they say in Washington, these individuals have been given the most difficult positions in Israeli government, the finance ministry and internal security, which is police. They are no-win positions. And let's see how they fare. Let's see how they fare when housing prices in Israel continue to rise. In the last 2 years, they went up over 40%. And guess who they hold responsible for that? The Minister of Finance. And when there are terrorist attacks, and it's very difficult to stop terrorist attacks if they're lone wolf attacks, if someone wakes up in the morning and decides to kill Jews, who do they blame? The Minister for Internal Security. So let's see what happens. It is premature. Having said all that, I will say to you today openly what I said in a closed conference with the American Jewish leadership a couple of weeks ago, right after the elections. I said, it's very important that in discussing the possible negative ramifications of an Israeli government, that you speak to Israelis not in American Jewish, but speak to them in Israeli. What does it mean to speak to Israelis? Because if you're American Jewish, you're going to talk about pluralism and Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism and openness and tolerance. It's great. But when you speak to Israelis, you want to speak Israeli, you got to speak security. And you want to remind Israelis that diaspora Jews, generally American Jews specifically, account for something like 6.5% of our GDP. That's the equivalent of our defense budget. You don't want to jeopardize that in any way. American Jews are essential for assuring the support of Congress and of whoever's in the White House, Democrats or Republican. It's essential to maintain that. And if you want your kids to sleep entirely safely at night, you don't want to jeopardize that. That's speaking Israeli. And I think it'll be very effective. The Israeli elections. Now on to apples, Ukraine. So if I've been critical of some of the aspects of Israeli domestic politics, I'm going to be also very critical of Israeli foreign policy on the Ukraine issue. Last February, with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Israel quickly, under a different government, the government of Naftali Bennett, national unity government with leftists, rightists, Arabs, declared neutrality. Neutrality. And the reason of this were several, but the most pressing reason was the presence of the Russian army in Syria. Now, the Iranians have been trying to transform Syria into a forward base for attacking us. And almost every night, our forces in the air, on the ground, operate in Syria to bomb the Iranians there. We do it all the time. But to do this, we run the danger of clashing with Russian forces that have been stationed there to help the Assad regime since 2015. So for the last 7 years, we have not had a single clash with the Russians, and we've been very, very effective in countering Iran's efforts to transform Syria into a forward base against us. And the fear was if Israel came out and supported Ukraine in this war, then the Russians would take vengeance on us by shooting at our aircraft or shooting at our forces. So I do a lot of commenting on on Israeli television. I get up there and I said, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing this. One, how many Russians actually are in Syria? There were only 4,000 Russian soldiers in Syria last February. They had an advanced anti-aircraft system known as the S-300. And I said, well, first of all, it is not really a good idea for a country that has an army this big to broadcast to the entire Middle East, including a lot of our enemies that we're afraid of a couple of thousand Russians. And secondly, they're not going to shoot at us with the S-300, because if they shoot at us and hit us, we're going to have to destroy the S-300, and the Russians won't be able to sell it anywhere. It's a big source of income for them. But the biggest reason was that we're actually doing the Russians' dirty work in Syria, because the Russians don't want the Iranians in Syria either, because the Iranians are in Syria for one purpose, and one purpose only, is to drag Syria into a war with us. So we're doing the dirty work. Why would they shoot at us? I was condemned. Oh, was I condemned? I was condemned on television. When I walked down the streets in southern Israel, people were coming up to me and saying, how could you support these anti-Semites? Don't you care about our forces more? And I said no. And the reasons were these. One, strategic. We must never take our eye off the ball, and I'll talk more about this ball. It's the Iran nuclear deal. And we need all the friends we can possibly muster in the world to stand with us when we confront Iran, and we are coming to a confrontation with Iran. Trust me. And when a good friend like Senator Lindsey Graham comes out and condemns us for not standing foursquare with Iran, that's a danger to us, a strategic danger. It's a much greater danger than having the Russians maybe fire at one of our airplanes. They're not. And the other reasons were moral. Moral. We are the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. How can the Jewish and democratic state of Israel not stand alongside a fellow democracy that has been invaded by a totalitarian state, a fellow democracy that is, by the way, led by a very proud Jew, someone who once considered making Aliyah in the early 90s, Zelensky, went through the whole process. How can we not do that? How can we look at ourselves in the mirror? So this may be very unpopular for a while. Scoot ahead a half a year, and the Russians have pretty much withdrawn from Syria. They're down to below 1,000 soldiers there. They have withdrawn the S-300. They're using it in Ukraine. And beyond all that, now the Iranians have joined the Russians openly in providing first drones and now potentially long-range missiles to the Russian military, which has created a completely different geostrategic situation in the region, but also in Europe. You have now, for the first time ever, a proxy war between the United States and Iran. Iranian munitions are being used to kill Europeans. That creates an entirely different dynamic. And it completely erases the argument of those in certain administrations who say, the Iranians aren't that bad. We can strike a deal with them. They got a problematic leadership, but the people are pretty nice. No, it doesn't work like that. And on top of now these demonstrations in Iran, where the Iranian regime is killing thousands of demonstrators, most of them women, make it very difficult to make an argument that Iran is an interlocutor for rapprochement with the United States. So ultimately, I think that Israel's position on Ukraine today is a lot less neutral than it has been. We are supplying, in addition to vast amounts of humanitarian aid, such as what Hatzalah provided, we are providing helmets, we're providing flak jackets, we're providing cyber help and intelligence information, and I'm far more at peace. I would like to see us provide Iron Dome. That's me. I think the Iron Dome is Iron Dome, the anti-ballistic system to the Ukrainians. Anti-Semitism. Take a breath. Take a breath. I grew up in a small neighborhood in northern New Jersey. I was the only Jewish kid in my neighborhood. Sicilian neighborhood. Ever see just Sopranos? Sopranos were filmed in my neighborhood until they told them to get out. They didn't like it. They actually talk like that. And I used to get beat up every day for being Jewish and for being a Christ killer. And it had a big impact, needless to say, on my Zionist development. My father had landed on Normandy Beach and had taken pictures of a concentration camp that he and his brother had liberated. I carry those pictures in my cell phone if you want to see them later. Very, very gruesome pictures. But every time I'd come home all bloodied, being called a Christ killer, my father would open this album and show me the pictures of the bodies and say, "You see that, son? That's why we need a strong state of Israel." So that has a very profound impact on a 9-year-old kid with a bloody nose, believe me. Very big. But I knew anti-Semitism. And I knew anti-Semitism, playing sports in college, and I knew anti-Semitism being at the UN. I was at the UN, I was an advisor, and used to listen to people in three-piece suits talking about how Jews weren't really human beings. It was extraordinary things. And of course, being on campuses over the years, you encounter anti-Semitism, so I know it very, very well. I wrote a book several years ago called Ally. It was sort of a memoir, and I talked about experiencing anti-Semitism, and some people said, well, this is not the American we know. Jews would say to American Jews, there's no anti-Semitism like this in the United States. Today, 5-6 years later, nobody says that. Everybody understands that anti-Semitism is a reality for American Jews. And it's not just the supposedly quote-unquote insane people who are coming out and saying anti-Semitic things, but the anti-Semitism has been mainstreamed. And has been mainstreamed on, the opening routines of Dave Chappelle on Saturday Night Live. But it's mainstreamed in ways that are subtle, but invidious and intentionally, ultimately very dangerous. And it is my concern that much of the leadership in charge of defending the American Jewish community against anti-Semitism is not taking this seriously enough. It's not acknowledging the nature of the threat, and I shall explain. There are different definitions of anti-Semitism. One is the definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Agency, IRA, and one of the definitions on that broader definition is that anybody who holds Israel to a moral standard which is higher and unique among that of democratic countries, that is condemning Israel consistently and hyperbolically, that it wouldn't condemn any other country, that is anti-Semitism. And denying Israel the right to exist as a Jewish state, denying the Jewish people the right of self-determination, is anti-Semitism. That definition is not universally accepted in this country. It is not. And yet, empirically, it has to be accepted if we are to defend ourselves. And I shall explain. Let's give an example. I gave an example before to several people. Bruce, if you're here, the example I gave to you was a front page, entire page of the New York Times that came out several weeks after our most recent conflict with Gaza, which was May 2021. And on the front page of the New York Times were 35 photographs of Palestinian children which Israel allegedly had killed during this operation, with a little biographical sketch next to each child. Whole front page of the New York Times. Now, the United States has killed thousands of civilians in its wars against ISIS, in its wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Thousands of children. There was never a front page of the New York Times dedicated to those children. They haven't even done it in the Ukraine. There was one country in the world they did this for. And the purpose of those 35 pictures was to delegitimize the Jewish state. Simply as that. There's no other excuse for it. There's no other reason for it, not even journalistically. Just delegitimize the Jewish state. According to the ADL's own statistics, there was a huge upsurge in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States that followed the 2/21 conflict in Gaza. And 81% of that huge uptick was related to anti-Israel activities. So if you are delegitimizing the Jewish state on the front page of the New York Times, that's going to translate at some point into anti-Semitism. It's going to translate into attacks on your communities. Because you're delegitimizing the nation state of the Jewish people. You are the Jewish people. And yet, the major organizations in this country have yet to call that front page of the New York Times anti-Semitic. And the people in charge of the fight against anti-Semitism on the government level have yet to call that anti-Semitism. It is nearly impossible to fight something if you can't define it. It's really impossible to fight it unless we are united around that definition. And the greatest task facing the American Jewish community today in confronting the scourge of rising anti-Semitism in this country is to agree on a definition and to rally around that definition. Stick to it. Stick to it. There was even disagreements about whether Dave Chappelle's opening monologue at SCI was anti-Semitic. It was profoundly anti-Semitic. Profoundly, extraordinarily anti-Semitic, including full of big lies. And unless you can actually call it that and stand around it, you will not be able to defend about it. That's my sincere feeling about this. We're a family. We disagree about a lot of things within this family. But at the end of the day, we're still a family. And not just any family. We are the world's most extraordinary, resilient family. You know, when we finished looking at these three pools, these three mikveh baths that were nearly 2,000 years old in Syracuse in Sicily, you climb up the 30 steps back into the sunlight. And you see the Roman ruins and the Greek ruins and the Arab ruins and the Norman ruins, all these magnificent ruins. And you say to yourself, wait a minute, they're all gone. Today's Greeks aren't the ancient Greeks. Today's Romans aren't the ancient Romans. And we're still here. We are still here. And not just here, we are the only ancient people that over the course of 4,000 years speaks the same language, reveres the same God, right? Claims a deep connection to the same territory. We're the only one. It's not the Egyptians, it's not the Romans, it's not the Greeks. We are the only ones. And today, we are part of this family who have created the most extraordinary state in modern history. There's the state of Israel. And I've mentioned, the uninterrupted democratic run and the army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies together and a country that has revived the Hebrew language. More people speak Hebrew today than speak Danish and Finnish and Norwegian together, combined. Oh my, imagine that. Imagine that. A country which leads the world in innovation. Sometimes the Swiss beat us out. They make high-tech clocks or something. I don't know. Sometimes the Swiss do this. A country that has more Nobel Prize winners than we do Olympic gold medal winners. And only a Jewish state would be proud of that. Imagine the poor guy who comes home winning an Olympic gold medal. Mom, look what I got you. No, where's your Nobel Prize? All of that is the accomplishment of this family. We're part of it. We're part of it. We've been part of it for thousands of years. And we'll be part of it in spite of the differences that sometimes separate us and sometimes appear to really separate us. The great thing to remember, they're gone, we're still here, and the water's still running. Still running. Fresh. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Dr.
Sarah?
Oren. For the powerful presentation. I know I learned a lot on 3 very different topics. And of course, we want to thank you for all you do to continue to support our homeland in Israel. My name is Sarah Walker. I'm the Federation's Associate Director of our Business and Professional Network and our Corporate Partnership Program. It's my honor to moderate a little bit of a Q&A with you here tonight. And I want to get us started. I know you were talking on 3 very different topics, but is there anything in the 30 minutes I gave you that you didn't get to touch on?
I do, by the way.
Perfect,
I have
exactly.
this crazy internal clock. I'm really good at name that tune to a completely useless talent, but I have an internal clock. She tells me 30 minutes, and I'll finish at 30 minutes. Go ahead.
So let me know, is there anything that you didn't get to touch on that you'd really like to share with this group here tonight?
Yeah, well, a few things. So among the things that one of the activities that I'm involved in Israel is an NGO called Israel 2048. And it's a project that I began with the Prime Minister's office and continue with my good friend Natan Sharansky at the Hartman Institute. What is it? It's a project that looks at Israel's future. How can we assure Israel a second century that is as successful as our first century? And so we're looking at all different issues: education, health, Israel diaspora, Israel Arabs, Israel Palestinians. Every issue, everything's on the table, no holds barred, everything's kosher, everything's policy oriented. And among the major issues that we're highlighting is the Bedouin crisis in the south, which we talked about earlier. Nobody knows anything about. By the way, what I'm going to tell you is 99% of Israelis don't know what I'm about to tell you. And that is that nobody knows how many Bedouin there are in the south. And Israel, 62% of Israel is the Negev. We're talking about Israel south of the city of Beersheba. If you go there, you will see an almost unbroken swath of illegal building by Bedouin. There are 400,000 illegal Bedouin structures in the Negev. If I build a 1 millimeter addition to my balcony in South Tel Aviv, I'll have a police van there in a second. They'll be give me a 10,000 shekel ticket. You can build an entire village in the Negev. No one's going to do anything. And you also have the largest natural population growth of any population, any community in the world. Israel has by far the highest natural increase rate of any industrialized country in the world, but within our society, it's the Bedouin. And that is a direct result of polygamy. 30% of Bedouin males have four wives. And this is not, Bedouin guy falls in love with fourth wife or third wife. This is basically chattel slavery. These women are acquired, they're purchased. And they produce a great number of children, and then they build these illegal communities, vast illegal communities. And within the communities, there have been twin processes that have taken place over the last 20 years. One is the Bedouin have become Palestinians. They were never Palestinians before. Now they're Palestinian Bedouin. And they were never Muslims in the way we understood Islam. They had a folk Sufi type of Islam. Now they are basically adherents to the Hamas-style Islamic movement. And it's interesting, the government, the Ram party, in the previous government of Knesset was a Bedouin, Palestinian nationalist, Islamic purist party. And it didn't happen. Now, it didn't happen by accident. We are responsible for all of this. We simply do not apply our laws against polygamy. Polygamy is illegal in the state of Israel. There are several laws against polygamy. If I took a second wife, not only would my first wife kill me, but the state would arrest me and throw me in prison. But I'm not living in the Negev. If I built an addition to my house, of course, I get that huge fine. Israel is hemorrhaging its sovereignty to the southern part of the country. And don't ask me, ask the Bedouin, because their big activists say we're taking over this part of the country, and eventually we'll take over the entire country. And they make no attempts to dissemble this, by the way. And so in this project of 2048, one of the chapters deals with, how to grapple with the Bedouin challenge. And by the way, I have great respect for Bedouin. I lived in the South for many years. I lived among them. Fantastic, interesting people, but we have to apply our laws. We have to apply our laws against illegal housing, legal construction, and against polygamy. Extremely, extremely important. And we can make a serious effort to bring the Bedouin into our society. We can no longer ignore them. We can no longer ignore their schools. We can no longer ignore their social infrastructure. We have to bring them into our society. So that's an issue, for example, which American Jews, anybody know about this issue, Bedouin issue? And which Israelis have to be educated about. But it is a serious threat to our future, serious threat to our future. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Okay, so I want to ask this very specifically. I know you touched earlier when we were talking about the Israeli election and kind of the diaspora, and here the American Jews make up about 6.5%, I think you said.
Yeah.
Correct. And, at a time when some say Israel and the diaspora is more divided than ever, how can we as American Jews feel more connected?
Okay. So I have been involved in public diplomacy for Israel. I want to say how long, something like 5 decades. And come through this all not only with a lot of gray hair, but with some fundamental conclusions about the nature of our foreign relations. I also still sit on an interministerial committee that's addressing the question of public diplomacy, there is never a time, where I go to an audience such as this and someone just say, why is your PR so bad? Okay? I know you're all thinking, why is their PR so bad? So we're addressing the question of why our PR is so bad. And there are many, many reasons. But the fundamental reason today is that Israelis have given up. They believe, especially young Israelis, believe that the world is anti-Semitic no matter what we do. The New York Times is going to publish that front page with the 35 kids. No matter how many risks we take and try and strive not to kill civilians in Gaza while they're firing thousands of rockets at us, we're still going to get that. And it's a very difficult argument to counter. And indeed, my position in this committee is we should not forget that we are a Jewish state. And as a Jewish state, we're going to be treated like Jews, particularly in the West. And not in India, not in China, but certainly in the West. And the West has had a certain problem with Jews that actually predates Christianity. It goes back to ancient Greece. For whatever reasons, it's a different discussion. But the fact of the matter is, young Jews in the diaspora, particularly in the United States, and we have to distinguish between Israel and the diaspora. My much better half is from Colombia, and they don't have these divisions within the community, and everyone's staunchly Zionist in the Colombian Jewish community. In the American Jewish community, particularly young people on campuses are exposed to a deluge of anti-Israel propaganda, which in 99.9% of the time bears absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to Israeli reality. There's an Israel of the mind that exists on American campuses which bears no resemblance to Israeli reality. And how do you begin to refute this? And I'm going to say, some tough things here, so brace yourself. We have been involved in this fight now for probably a quarter of a century with some extraordinary organizations that have come up to help defend the state of Israel and teach about public diplomacy. They've all failed. The situation on campuses today is actually worse than it was 10, 15 years ago. So something's doing something wrong. Or you can say to yourself, as my good buddy Brett Stevens has said on the pages of the New York Times, it's a lost cause. Forget about it. We should stop throwing money onto campus battles because we're not going to win them. And, Brett is not entirely wrong because the anti-Israel sentiment on the campuses is hardwired into the curriculum. It's hardwired into the classes. So how do you begin to combat that? This goes back to the roots of campus political atmosphere, which goes back to the 1960s and how the tenure system works. It's almost impossible to combat. On the other hand, I don't think we can abandon, and here I disagree with Brett, I don't think we can abandon these children. All right? There are kids on these campuses. I sit on a board with Natan Sharansky and our president, Isaac Herzog. We monitor the 2,400 Israeli shlichim and shlichot around the world. And we talk to them on Zoom on some of these campuses, some of them, by the way, nearby in Madison. And we're horrified to hear what they go through, the physical threats. How can they, some of them say we can't hold out here. It's that bad. And we can't abandon them. We can't abandon them. There is one, to my mind, tried and true solution. And again, it's only a partial solution. And that is you have to bring young people to the state of Israel. Because there's no other way they're going to counter Israeli reality. Bring them to the state of Israel. That's it. I was Israel's representative on the Birthright Board, and I saw firsthand how tens and tens of thousands of Jewish youth from around the world came to Israel for 10 days, and it was transformative for them. Transformative to them. I'll end with a little story, if I can. How are we doing time-wise?
I think we're going to have time for one more question.
Oh, I'm going to still get the story, though.
Okay.
And it's this, every Israeli parent hates the last week of August. Because that's the week where you still have to go to work, but your kids are out of camp. Which means the grandparents have to take care of the kids. I'm a grandparent, six grandkids. And I hate the last week of August, too, because I got to somehow to keep these kids busy for an entire week. And it's hot, so you take them to a water park. Take them to a water park. And there's a water park in Cholon, which is this nice working-class community south of Tel Aviv. And I took them to this water park with massive slides. And in this water park, there were not tens of thousands. There were tens of thousands of kids with their grandparents. And what was extraordinary about this vision of this group, this sight of these tens of thousands of kids, was that I would say a fifth of them were Africans. And I don't mean Ethiopians. Hebrew-speaking Africans. A fifth were Arabs, most of the women wearing, halal bathing suits. Another fifth were ultra-Orthodox Jewish women also wearing halal bathing suits. And a smattering of like sort of other Israelis. And I thought to myself, okay, this is the real Israel. This is massive diversity on a massive scale. It is it's coexistence, it's tolerance. These tens of thousands of kids from different races, different religions, different backgrounds, all screaming in this water park. And if I had my druthers, I would take 10,000 young American Jews every year, and I wouldn't necessarily bring them to Yad Vashem. I wouldn't necessarily bring them to the shrine of the book of the Israel Museum. I'd bring them to that water park and say, this is Israel. Show me where this happens in America. Show me where it happens anywhere in the world. And yet, in that water park, we are a 7-hour drive from Baghdad. We're an 8-hour drive from Cairo. We're a 4-hour drive from Beirut. A 5-hour drive from Damascus. Hello? That's Israel. That's my story. Sorry.
It's a really great story.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to ask you one final thing. We are running a little short on time, but I want to end here. Can you tell us, Dr. Oren, one thing you're nervous about in the next 3 to 5 years for Israel, and one thing you're looking forward to in the next 3 to 5 years in Israel, in 1 to 2 sentences?
Retirement. Vacation. I'm very concerned about the coming conflict with Iran. And we haven't talked about it at all today. And we haven't talked about the Palestinian issue, many, many things we haven't talked. Think about all the things we didn't talk about today. I don't think the Palestinian issue is going to change. I've been involved in, I have the unique perspective of having been involved in every single peace initiative going back to 1993. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, up to the Trump initiative. And I've reached some basic conclusions, and that is that we are barking up the wrong tree. We're not going to have that type of peace. We can manage the conflict better, but a solution is not in the offing. But that's another discussion. And I'm less concerned about it. Yes, there will be upheaval. Yes, there will be terror. The biggest strategic threat we face is from Iran. And the Iranian regime now is actually under tremendous duress, both because of what's happening domestically in Iran and these protests, while they are unlikely to overthrow the regime has at its disposal a 1 million-man security apparatus, which is the army, the Basij, which is a group of thugs, and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard. And there may be 100,000 people on the street, but they're going to be facing 1 million-man people who are armed, and they will use those arms. But if the regime feels insecure, it'll be more prone to pick a fight with us. And it has created a tremendous circlement of Israel, of rockets, probably about 150,000 rockets in the hands of Hezbollah. They are situated in under 200 Lebanese villages. It's the family rocket. The roof opens up, the rocket goes up, hits Haifa, because they want us to destroy the family. They want us to so we can be accused of war crimes. It is rockets. It is tens of thousands of rockets in the hands of Shiite militias in western Iraq, in the hand of Houthi rebels in Yemen. They can hit us too. And, of course, in Gaza, where you have Islamic Jihad and Hamas, all of which are wholly operated and supplied by Iran. About 95% of the rockets fired at us from Gaza are actually made in Iran. So they can surprise us. And the regime wants a nuclear weapon. It wants a nuclear weapon for 2 reasons. One, because the Hindus have one, and the Pakistanis have one, and the Jews supposedly have one. How can we not have one? But also for regime survival. They saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. They saw what happened to Muammar Gaddafi because they gave up their nuclear program. They're dead. They saw what happened to Zelensky. Ukraine gave up his nuclear option. They see what happened to him. He gets invaded. We're not going there. We're getting one of those things because we're going to go the way of North Korea. No one screws around with North Korea because they got a nuclear weapon. We're going to get one of those things. And when they go to get one, we're going to try to stop them. And when we go to try to stop them, they're going to hit us with tens of thousands of rockets. So I was in the Second Lebanon War. Israel was hit by between 200 and 400 rockets a day in the Second Lebanon War. The IDF estimate for the next war is between 2,000 and 5,000 rockets a day. And there's no system, Iron Dome or other, that can defend us against that onslaught. So we're talking about a regional conflict. A regional conflict that will, and its dimensions could be as big as the Six-Day War, there's the 1973 war. And it's essential It's essential that the United States be able to stand with us, and that the American Jewish community stands with us. Because it's going to be very controversial. There's going to be a lot of collateral damage, which is precisely what the enemy wants. Precisely what the enemy wants. And so when I talk about mishpocha, when I talk about family, that's the moment. We're being part of a family. We really count. And it will put tremendous strains on our family. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it. But this is something, this is a moment where, as so often in the past, we're going to have to stand together at the greatest degree possible. A final thought. And, I'm getting to the point where I want to make myself sound like really, really old. But I moved to Israel now 45 years ago. 45 years ago. And in my lifetime, I've witnessed miracles. That's all I can have said. Because I moved to Israel, we didn't have peace with Jordan. We didn't have peace with Egypt. Of course not with the UAE and Bahrain and Sudan and Morocco. Completely unthinkable. Unthinkable. There were 3 million Jews behind the Iron Curtain who couldn't study Judaism, who go to prison for trying to be Jews. In Ethiopia, thousands and thousands of Jews denied freedom. No relations with China, no relations with what was then known as the Soviet bloc, if you remember those things. Almost no relations with Africa. After the Yom Kippur War, almost all of Africa cut off relations with us. Almost no relations with South America. A nice relationship with the United States, but not a strategic alliance with the United States. And it's in not just my lifetime, my time in Israel, I've seen all of these changes. But everything changed. And all of this, if you look back, we tend to look at history as inevitable in some way. None of this was inevitable. None of this was even conceivable when I stepped off that airplane in the 1970s in the state of Israel. It's very important to keep this in mind when we think about, oh God, the possible pitfalls of the next Israeli government, or whether Israel's made the right decision on Ukraine, or whether we can unite as a community to stand up against anti-Semitism, and whether Israel, the American Jewish community and the strength of the American Jewish community can continue to be such a strategic asset to the state of Israel. It's important to remember this. The most important word in my vocabulary today, after many, many decades of involved in this, is gratitude. We just have to be thankful. We live at the most extraordinary moment in Jewish history. We live in the moment where every single Jew in the world, everybody, is free. It's free and strong and successful. Just remember it. Gratitude. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Can I go?
Yes, you may.
Am I free? Am I free?
Thank you, Dr. Oren. I now have the unfortunate job of beginning to wrap us up, but I have the wonderful pleasure of handing us over to Mark Shapiro.
So I just learned something new. You and I have the exact same thing. When I'm told I have 3 minutes, I think I have 30 minutes also. That's awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Shapiro, and especially on a night like tonight, I feel very blessed to get to be the president and CEO of our own Harry and Rose Sampson Family JCC. On behalf of Ryan Odesky, our chair, the board, the staff, everyone, we are so honored to have you here tonight. You gave us the words and framed for us the opportunity to be able to say things that are not always that easy. And so, as I've learned, important former ambassador, we really want to thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and your soul with our community. We're so fortunate to have you as our guest here, and looking forward to reading the Swan's War. So thanks for sharing that idea with us. Thank you to United Hatzalah and Kim Fish. You're quite the powerhouse, by the way. And we want to share our gratitude with our co-chairs. Tonight is one of those nights that shows the power of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. Harnessing our community together, the Weinstein Fellowship that year after year brings board members to all of our community organizations, brings amazing leaders like Joel and Missy to us. I want to thank you guys for ensuring that tonight was so wonderful. We have great gratitude to you for that. I also want to thank all the amazing staff and the lay leadership of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation for partnering with us on this event. To all of you who took your time out this evening, I know you were all energized by a Packers win, so even more, thank you for spending some time with us here. And most importantly, thank you for caring about the future of Israel and the future of our Jewish community, the future of Jews anywhere. We have great gratitude for you spending time with us tonight. Have a great evening.